The ice hit the kitchen window like buckshot at 3:47 in the morning. I was already awake, standing at the counter with my old Navy mug, watching the freezing rain turn everything outside into glass. The weather radio on the shelf crackled with warnings I'd been tracking for 2 days. Wind gusts 70 miles per hour, quarter-inch ice accumulation expected, possibly more. The kind of storm that doesn't just pass through Cedar Falls, Iowa. It stays, settles in, and breaks things that can't be fixed quickly. I took a slow sip of coffee. It was hot, bitter, exactly the way I'd been drinking it for 52 years. My hands were steady, they always were. 23 years in the Navy teaches you that panic is a choice, and I'd chosen differently a long time ago. Outside, the street light at the corner of Maple and 4th flickered once, twice, then died. The neighbor's porch light went next, then mine. The hum of the refrigerator behind me cut off mid-cycle, and the house fell into a silence so complete I could hear the ice tapping against the siding like skeletal fingers. I walked to the basement door, flipped it open, and descended the wooden steps I'd reinforced myself 3 years ago. The air down there smelled like concrete, motor oil, and the faint metallic tang of stored fuel. My backup generator sat in the corner, a Generac GP7500E I'd purchased after the blizzard of 2018, the one that killed 4 people in the county because they couldn't keep warm. I'd tested it every month since. Angela from next door had watched me through her kitchen window one Saturday morning, shaking her head with that pitying smile people reserve for the old and the foolish. She'd come over later that afternoon, leaning against my fence with her arms crossed, her yoga pants still spotless, her highlighted hair perfect even in the wind. "Steve, you know the power company fixes things pretty fast these days," she'd said, her voice sweet with condescension. "You don't have to live like you're preparing for the apocalypse. Relax a little. Enjoy your retirement." I'd looked at her for a long moment, this woman in her early 40s who ordered everything online and thought resilience was a yoga pose. I didn't argue. I never did. I just nodded, smiled, and went back to checking the oil level in the generator. Arguments don't teach anyone anything, experience does. Now in the basement, I primed the fuel line, checked the battery, and pulled the starter cord. The engine coughed once, then roared to life, a deep mechanical growl that vibrated through the floor joists above my head. I let it warm up for 60 seconds, then flipped the transfer switch I'd installed myself. The lights in the basement came on. Upstairs, the refrigerator hummed back to life. The furnace kicked in. My house, my fortress, was operational. I climbed back upstairs and looked out the front window. The entire street was black. No lights, no movement, just the relentless sound of ice hammering the world into submission. I could see Angela's house, dark as a tomb. I could see the Hendersons' place across the street, the Ramirez family's 2 doors down, the Caldwells at the corner. All of them dark, all of them cold, all of them unprepared. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. The oak surface was scarred from decades of use, marked with the circular stains of 1,000 mugs, the small gouges from my late wife's cutting board, the dent from the time our grandson had dropped a toy truck during Thanksgiving dinner 7 years ago. Ellen had been alive then. She'd laughed at the noise, kissed the boy's head, told him accidents were just life, reminding us nothing lasts forever. She'd understood preparation. She'd understood that the world doesn't owe you comfort, doesn't owe you safety. You build those things yourself or you suffer without them. She'd been gone 4 years now. Heart attack in the garden, sudden and absolute, the way she would have wanted it if she'd been given a choice. But I still heard her voice sometimes, especially in moments like this. "Steve," she'd say, "don't gloat. Just help when they ask. And they will ask." The first day passed in relative silence. I ran the generator for 6 hours, then shut it down to conserve fuel. I'd stored 30 gallons in stabilized jerry cans, rotated every 6 months, enough for 2 weeks if I was careful. The house stayed at 68 degrees. I ate beef stew I'd canned last October, drank water from the 70 gallons I kept in food-grade containers in the pantry, and listened to the weather radio. The updates were grim. Transmission towers down across 3 counties, trees through power lines. Substations damaged. Estimated restoration time 7 to 10 days. By the second day, I started seeing movement outside. People venturing out of their dark houses, bundled in coats, looking confused and frightened. The Hendersons tried starting their car, probably hoping to charge their phones or run the heater. The battery was dead. Cold does that. I watched Tom Henderson, a software engineer who made 3 times what I ever did, stare at his luxury SUV like it had personally betrayed him. His wife, Sandra, stood on the porch hugging herself, her breath misting in the air. Their 2 kids, maybe 8 and 10 years old, pressed their faces against the front window, looking out at a world that had stopped working. I could have walked over, could have offered help, but I knew how that would go. Tom Henderson had once told me at a neighborhood barbecue that people who stockpile supplies are living in fear. He'd said it while drinking his 3rd craft beer, laughing with the other younger neighbors, the ones who thought security was a smartphone app and preparedness was paranoia. So I stayed inside, waited, because Ellen was right. They'd ask eventually. The 3rd day is when Angela came. It was just after noon. The temperature outside had dropped to negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit, the kind of cold that kills exposed skin in minutes, that turns moisture in your lungs to frost, that makes your bones ache just thinking about it. I was at the kitchen table eating crackers with peanut butter when I heard the knock. Not a polite knock, a desperate one, frantic, rhythmic, the sound of someone who'd run out of options. I opened the door. Angela stood on my porch, and I barely recognized her. The woman who'd always looked like she'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine was gone. Her face was pale, almost gray, with dark circles under her eyes that looked like bruises. Her hair, usually so carefully maintained, hung in greasy tangles around her face. She wore 3 jackets layered clumsily, and her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't keep them still. But it wasn't the cold making her shake. It was fear. "Steve," she said, and her voice cracked on my name. "Please. I need help." "It's my mom." I stepped aside and she stumbled in, bringing a wave of frigid air with her. She smelled like sweat and desperation, and the particular staleness that comes from living in a cold house with no ventilation, no running water, no way to stay clean. I closed the door behind her and watched as she stood in my entryway, looking around at the lights, the warmth, the impossible normalcy of my home. "Your power," she whispered. "How do you have power?" If you've ever been in a situation where someone who mocked you suddenly needed you to survive, please subscribe to this channel and like this video. It helps us bring real, impactful stories to more people who need to hear them. Now back to Angela standing in my warm house while her world fell apart. "Generator," I said simply. "The one you told me I didn't need." She didn't argue, didn't defend herself. She just stood there, trembling, and I saw something in her eyes I'd seen before in younger sailors during storms at sea, the exact moment when arrogance dies and humility is born out of pure survival instinct. "My mom," Angela said again, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's 78, she has diabetes, her insulin, Steve, it needs to be refrigerated. It's been 3 days. I don't know if it's still good, and she hasn't been eating. The house is so cold, she's confused. She won't get out of bed, I think she's dying." I looked at this woman who'd laughed at my preparation, who'd pitied my caution, who'd dismissed 52 years of hard-earned wisdom as the paranoid delusions of an old man who couldn't accept that the world had moved on. And I felt something I didn't expect. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Just a deep, bone-tired sadness that people have to suffer before they learn what I tried to teach them by example. "Where is she?" I asked. "Next door in the bedroom. I can't get her warm. I tried everything. Blankets, layers, I even burned some furniture in the fireplace, but the smoke got so bad and it didn't help and—" "Stop," I said, not unkindly. "Go get her. Bring her here. Carefully. Bundle her up as much as you can. I'll prepare the guest room." Angela stared at me like I'd just offered her a kidney. You'd let her stay here? You think I'd let an old woman freeze to death 20 feet from my door because her daughter didn't believe in backup plans?" I shook my head. "Go. Now. Every minute she's in that cold is a minute closer to hypothermia." She ran, actually ran, slipping slightly on the ice as she crossed from my porch to hers. I watched through the window as she disappeared inside her dark house, and then I moved. The guest room upstairs was always ready. Ellen had insisted on that, said you never knew when someone might need refuge. I turned on the electric blanket, set it to medium, pulled back the comforter. I went to the kitchen, filled a pot with water, set it on the stove to boil. Warm liquids. Gradual reheating. That's how you treat hypothermia. Rush it, and you can stop someone's heart. I heard Angela's front door bang open. Through my window, I watched her half carry, half drag an elderly woman across the frozen gap between our houses. The old woman, Dorothy, I remembered her name was Dorothy, looked like a corpse already. Her skin had that waxy bluish tint. Her eyes were half closed. Her movements were sluggish, mechanical, the way a body moves when the brain is shutting down non-essential functions to keep the core alive just a little longer. I opened my door before Angela could knock. Together, we got Dorothy inside, up the stairs, into the guest room. I closed the door to trap the heat, pulled off the frozen outer layers of clothing carefully, checking for frostbite on her fingers and toes. Minor damage. Painful, but not critical. Her core temperature was the real danger. I wrapped her in the electric blanket, piled 2 more regular blankets on top, tucked them tight. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, the panicked respiration of a body in crisis. Talk to her, I told Angela. Keep her conscious, I'll get the insulin. It's at my house in the kitchen. Which is how cold right now? 30 degrees? 40? I headed for the stairs. Insulin can handle short-term temperature fluctuations if it hasn't frozen solid. We'll test it, use it if we can, if not, we'll deal with that next. I crossed to Angela's house, pushed open the unlocked door, and stepped into a tomb of cold and darkness. My breath misted immediately. The air had that sharp, penetrating quality of a house that's been without heat for 72 hours in sub-zero weather. I found the insulin in the kitchen, 4 vials in a butter dish on the counter, surrounded by melted ice packs that had long since lost their cold. I held each vial up to the light from my flashlight. No ice crystals, no cloudiness. They might still be viable. When I got back, Dorothy was more responsive. Her eyes tracked me as I entered the room, and that was a good sign. Consciousness meant her brain was getting enough oxygen, meant her core temperature was stabilizing. Angela sat beside her on the bed, holding her hand, crying silently, her tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on her face. "Mom," Angela whispered. "Mom, can you hear me?" "Cold," Dorothy murmured. "So cold." I know, but we're warm now. We're safe now." I checked Dorothy's blood sugar with the meter I kept in my medicine cabinet. Ellen had been pre-diabetic, and I'd held onto her supplies. The reading was dangerously high, 287. Without insulin, without proper food, her body was eating itself. I prepared an injection, standard dose, and administered it into her abdomen, while Angela held her mother's hand and whispered reassurances. "She'll need monitoring," I said. "Every 4 hours, blood sugar, temperature, fluids, and she needs to eat, but slowly. Small amounts, nothing that will shock her system." Angela looked at me with something approaching awe. "How do you know all this?" "Navy. Saw hypothermia cases in the North Atlantic, diabetic crew members in crisis situations." I stood, collected the insulin vials, placed them in my refrigerator downstairs. You learn things when you can't just call 911 and wait for someone else to solve your problems. That night, I ran the generator longer than I'd planned. 4 extra hours. The fuel cost was significant, but Dorothy needed consistent warmth, needed the electric blanket, needed the refrigerated medication. Angela slept on the couch in my living room, fully dressed, ready to check on her mother every time I woke her, and I watched through the window as more houses on my street went darker, colder, more desperate. The 4th day brought visitors. Tom Henderson came first, just after dawn. I was outside checking the generator exhaust vent to make sure ice hadn't blocked it when I heard his voice. "Steve." I turned. Tom stood at the edge of my driveway, his expensive winter coat zipped to his chin, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. His face was red from cold and something else. Shame, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. "I need to ask you something," he said. And I know I don't have the right, but my kids, Steve, they're so cold. Sandra found some chemical hand warmers in the garage, but they ran out yesterday. The kids are sleeping in sleeping bags in our bed, all of us together, and it's still not enough. Emma, she's 8. She cried herself to sleep last night because her feet hurt from the cold. I'd known this was coming, I'd prepared for it mentally and practically, but hearing it still hit different. An 8-year-old girl crying from cold while her father, a man who'd mocked preparation as fear, stood on my driveway begging for help. "What are you asking, Tom?" He swallowed hard. "Can we use your house during the day? Just for a few hours. To warm up. Charge our phones. I'll pay you, I'll do anything." "I don't want your money," I said. "But I need something from you. Anything. Admission, public, to everyone who told me I was paranoid, wasteful, living in fear. I need you to tell them that old men who prepare aren't crazy. They're wise. Can you do that?" The silence stretched between us like frozen wire. Tom's jaw worked, his eyes watered, and I didn't think it was just from the wind. Then he nodded. "You're right," he said, and his voice cracked. "You were right. We were arrogant. I was arrogant, and my daughter paid the price for my arrogance." "Bring your family over at 8, I told him. "They can stay until noon. I'll make hot food. But they follow my rules. Use only what I allocate and respect that this isn't a hotel. It's a survival situation, and I'm in charge. Understood?" "Understood." By noon, there were 11 people in my house. The Hendersons, the Ramirez family, Carlos, his wife Maria, and their teenage son, an elderly widower from 3 doors down named Frank Patterson, who I'd seen twice at the mailbox, but never really talked to. He'd come on his own, knocking quietly, asking nothing, just standing there with the patience of a man who'd learned long ago that pride kills faster than cold. I organized them. That's what you do in crisis. You establish order, structure, hierarchy. The living room became the warming center. I ran the generator in 4-hour cycles, enough to keep the furnace active, the refrigerator running, the lights on. I made soup in my largest pot, a simple beef and vegetable recipe that stretched to feed 13 people. I boiled water for tea, for cocoa, for washing hands and faces. I charged phones in rotation, 20 minutes each, enough for people to send messages to loved ones, to check on elderly relatives, to confirm they were still alive, and I made them work. Tom Henderson split firewood from my backup pile. Carlos Ramirez helped me inventory supplies, creating a spreadsheet on his phone of what we had versus what we'd need if the power stayed out another week. Maria taught the kids how to play card games by candlelight to conserve electricity. Sandra Henderson and Angela organized a meal schedule, figuring out how to stretch my canned goods, my dry pasta, my rice, my flour. Dorothy improved steadily. By the 5th day, she was sitting up, eating small portions of oatmeal, speaking in complete sentences. Her blood sugar stabilized, her color returned. Angela barely left her side, and when she did, she found me in the kitchen and said 6 words that I'll remember until my last breath. "You saved my mother's life." "I did what anyone with the means should do," I said. "No." She shook her head firmly. "Most people with means wouldn't have let us in. Most people would have said we deserved what we got for mocking you, for calling you paranoid, for laughing at your generators and your stored food and your..." Her voice broke. "Your wisdom. That's what it was. Not paranoia. Wisdom." By the 7th day, word had spread. I had people I didn't even know knocking on my door. A single mother with an infant, 2 college kids who'd stayed in town for winter break, an elderly couple whose son lived in California and couldn't get to them. I couldn't take everyone. I didn't have resources for everyone. So I made hard choices, families with children first, elderly with medical needs second. Everyone else got 2 hours of warmth per day and access to boiled water. I became, without choosing it, the center of a small community. People brought what they had. Someone contributed 5 cans of beans. Someone else had 3 bottles of water. An elderly man showed up with a battery-powered radio that could pick up emergency broadcasts more clearly than mine. We pooled resources. We shared body heat. We told stories to distract the children from their fear and hunger. And somewhere in those 12 days, something shifted. The younger neighbors who dismissed me as a relic, as an old man stuck in an irrelevant past, started asking questions. How did you know to stockpile fuel? Where did you learn to ration food? What made you think this could happen? I told them about the blizzard of '78, about the blackout of 2003, about hurricane seasons and ice storms, and the 1,000 small emergencies that teach you one fundamental truth. Modern convenience is a fragile illusion built on infrastructure that can fail without warning. I told them about my time in the Navy, about being on a ship in the North Pacific when the power systems failed, and we had to run on backup generators for 6 days, about watching young sailors panic because they'd never experienced genuine hardship, genuine danger, genuine dependence on preparation instead of rescue. The world doesn't stop being dangerous just because you have Wi-Fi and next-day delivery, I said one night, sitting in my living room with 8 adults and 5 children crowded around my propane camping heater. It just hides the danger behind convenience, until the convenience fails. Then the danger is still there, waiting, exactly as hungry as it always was. On the 10th day, I saw utility trucks working on the main transmission lines 2 miles away. By the 11th day, parts of town had power. By noon on the 12th day, my street lit up like Christmas, and the collective sigh of relief was almost audible. People went home. They cried. They hugged. They thanked me with words that felt simultaneously too small and too large for what we'd survived together. Tom Henderson shook my hand for a full 30 seconds. Couldn't speak. Just gripped my hand like it was the only solid thing in a world that had proven itself unstable. Carlos Ramirez invited me to dinner once his house warmed up, said his family would never forget what I'd done. Frank Patterson, the elderly widower, just nodded at me from across the street, and I nodded back, and that was enough. Men of our generation understand that some gratitude is too deep for words. Angela was the last to leave. Dorothy was stable enough to return home, the house was warming, the refrigerator was running. Before they left, Angela stood in my doorway. Her mother wrapped in one of my blankets and said something that made every gallon of stored fuel, every can of food, every mocked preparation worth it. "I'm going to tell everyone," she said, "everyone who'll listen, that you were right, that being prudent isn't paranoia, that the elderly aren't obsolete. They're the ones who remember how to survive when everything modern fails. I'm going to tell them that at 70 years old, you saved my mother's life, my life and the lives of 6 families, because you refused to relax and forget the lessons you learned the hard way." 3 weeks later, at the neighborhood meeting to discuss disaster preparedness, a meeting that would never have happened before the storm, Angela stood up in front of 40 people and told them exactly that. She told them how she'd mocked me, how she'd called me paranoid, how she'd been so arrogant in her modern convenience that she'd nearly killed her own mother through negligence disguised as confidence. And then she said something I'll never forget. "Steve didn't save us because we deserved it. He saved us because that's what prepared people do. They don't prepare to feel superior, they prepare to protect. And at 70 years old, this man has more courage, more wisdom, and more genuine strength than anyone half his age in this room, including me." The applause was long, uncomfortable for me. I don't do well with praise, but necessary, I think, for them. They needed to publicly acknowledge what they'd learned, and I needed to let them, because that's how communities heal. Tom Henderson started keeping emergency supplies. Carlos Ramirez bought a generator. 5 other families took FEMA's disaster preparedness course. The neighborhood slowly, grudgingly, began to remember what their grandparents knew. That comfort is temporary, that security is built, not bought, and that experience isn't obsolete just because it's old. I'm 70 years old. My hands shake a little more than they used to. My back hurts on cold mornings. I can't do half the things I could do at 30, but I can do one thing better than almost anyone. I can prepare. I can anticipate. I can remember that the world doesn't care about your confidence, your smartphone, your online shopping. When the power goes out and the temperature drops and the veneer of civilization cracks, the only thing that matters is whether you prepared or whether you prayed someone else did. They called me paranoid, they called me obsessive, they called me a relic. And then, when it mattered most, they called me for help. And I'll tell you something about being 70 years old that the young don't understand yet. Vindication isn't about being right. It's about being ready when everyone else realizes they were wrong. It's about transforming your home into an ark when the flood comes, not so you can say, "I told you so," but so you can say, "Climb aboard." Because at the end of everything, when the lights go out and the cold settles in and the modern world stops pretending it can protect you, the person who survives isn't the smartest or the strongest or the youngest. It's the person who remembered that survival is a skill, not a guarantee, and who practiced that skill every single day, even when people laughed, even when people mocked, even when people called them paranoid. Experience doesn't make you old. It makes you dangerous to the things that kill the unprepared. And at 70, I'm more dangerous than I've ever been. Not to people, but to the chaos that comes when systems fail and illusions break. They called me paranoid at 70. Then the power stayed out for 12 days, and I became the only reason they survived to see the 13th. If this story moved you as much as we hoped it would, leave a comment telling us which moment most impacted your life. Subscribe to the channel to follow stories that touch the heart and transform perspectives. Like this video and share it with someone who needs to understand that in life, prudence and preparation can be the greatest of all virtues. Because the world doesn't reward arrogance, it rewards readiness, and sometimes being called paranoid is just another way of being called prepared.